All right. I was asked to come out and talk about researching the real tanks for about an hour. I ain't gonna make it. Unfortunately, actually doing the research is very, very simple. So talking about it is also very, very simple. So I guess we'll start off with a couple of, out of interest, when I was last here at this facility 3 years ago, how many other people were? Yeah, a couple. Okay, so I shall try not to use too many of the same jokes. I guess the other thing, if you have a hunt on my Facebook page, you'll actually see a photo of me in uniform with a right shoulder patch. And the right shoulder patch is the combat patch. It shows what unit you were with. It's a First ID one. I don't know if anybody from First ID Museum is here. If this gives me freebies, please throw them my way. Okay. All right, so this is what we're talking about. How do we get from the original tank to implement it, or to give the sufficient information to give to the developers that they can implement it in the game? Because obviously, most developers don't know an idler wheel from a sprocket wheel. And we have to give them the information that they can use to turn them into tanks. And then once the modelers have it, then you've also got to give it to the game balance team, you've got to give it to the programmers, you've got to program in the armor values, you've got to program in angles of slope, you've got to program in horsepower, weight ratios, all the other myriad of features which gets incorporated into the tank. And I see cameras here, so I guess I probably want to be careful about what I say at times. So the problem with doing these things publicly is it takes a lot of your latitude out. But anyway, all right. So I guess the first question is, how do you figure, before we even get to this, how do we even figure out what tanks you're going to implement? And the answer is generally, well, what tanks can we find out about? And we will get on the forum, we will get people posting, hey, here's this wonderful tank that I found a photo of. This will make a great premium. Why don't you put it in the game? And it is something like a bizarre Israeli modification of a Sherman that has a captured Soviet gun in a homemade mounting with a couple of pieces of sheet metal around it, or something like that. There are two problems with this. Firstly, we actually have a pretty good team of researchers. The chances are 99% of these vehicles we already know about. The second problem is knowing that a vehicle existed is not the first criterion, or does not make it a top-tier vehicle for implementation. Because, okay, we got a photograph of it. Fantastic. What's the gun depression? What's the ammo storage layout? What's the... all the various things that you need to know to implement a vehicle into the game that you can't tell from a photograph. Now, people are going to immediately say, how about the Napkenwaffe? That some drunk German engineer overloaded on schnapps in a pub in Nuremberg in 1944, drew out a scribble on a cocktail napkin, and we've now implemented it into the game. Yeah, okay. In actuality, the Napkenwaffe or the paper panzers, the Germans actually put a lot of effort into them. They do have a lot of the materials are still in the archives, and I mean, a lot of it has been dug up by people like Jens Doyle. But they actually they were very detailed specifications. They were very detailed Napkenwaffe, so we were able to come up with something. T-28 prototype is another example of going a little bit beyond that. So, of course, the T-28 prototype was never built. It was, what they did was they took, well, let's look at the T-28 idea, as there was this pen and paper drawing in Honeycutt that Honeycutt had found of this assault gun, which was basically a huge, heavily armored fortress with a turret and guns sticking out the front. So the developers were there going, well, if this was actually to be built with the technology available to the Americans at the time, what would it look like? And that's how you end up with the T-28 prototype with that chin out front for the forward transmission, and so on. So we didn't completely make it up. We do try. The problem we've discovered, for example, the US Army, when coming up with 10 tiers of tank destroyers, is that the US Army did not bother to think about us making computer games in 10 tiers when they were developing all the tank destroyers. So there's all sorts of 76 millimeter, 3-inch, and 90 millimeter tank destroyers that we can yet implement. And please don't talk to me about the premium tank destroyer. That's another matter. But that's fantastic. So I've made multiple branches of USTDs up to about tier 7. And then it stops. Because the US gave up on gun motor carriages and didn't build anymore, didn't design anymore. That was the end of it. Unfortunately, we have 10 tiers in the game. So that's why you start getting a little bit squiffy, I guess, with the higher tier American tank destroyers, because the Americans thought they were stupid and they didn't build them. But we got to implement them in the game. So I'm very curious to find out when they come up with the German Czech tree and World of Warships, what they're going to do for the aircraft carrier line. I mean, they'll probably get 4 or 5 tiers, but there's going to be some imagination. Anyway, so let us say we decide that we think we can get enough information, enough photographs to actually model one of these things and implement it into the game. Well, the problem is then you have your various sources and you have to rank them. Joe blogs saying, I looked into a Sherman and it was nice and roomy and had a big gun and it seemed to have 3 inches of armor, is not really going to cut it if we have anything better. And unfortunately, multiple sources that are ordinarily very reputable will not match each other. Honeycutt is considered to be the gold standard for American tank books. So if you have, who owns a Honeycutt book? Anybody? You own a Honeycutt book? You own a Honeycutt book? You illegally downloaded the PDF? Library? Okay, libraries are good. Your typical Honeycutt book will go for $300 to $400. That's probably why most of you don't have one. But the reason they go for $300 to $400 is because he is the gold standard. That said, he is not always right. I have found things that are flat out contradicted by what I found in the archives. Now, the problem is, where did Honeycutt get his data? The archives. So you have multiple good sources. And we're not even talking about reputable people like Honeycutt or Doyle. We're talking about the horse's mouth. One horse's mouth doesn't agree with the other horse's mouth about the same thing. So how do you rank all these various sources of information? Well, the very top one is the operator's manual. We figure the operator's manual is probably pretty close. Actually, what I'm going to do is I have an idea. This is actually just a preview slide. I should go to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of the manuals do still exist. The reason that we will go with them, if at all possible, is that between when a vehicle is tested and when it is put into production as a service vehicle, there are usually some tweaks and modifications made. And as you can see, we generally presume a manual is accurate. Isn't always, but we generally is. So this is an example of the Dash 10 for the M10 gun motor carriage, which I've been trying to get the name changed in the game, and I'm not winning. And it's got a couple of different things. So in addition to how do you use the vehicle, which in fairness, the correct starting technique is not necessary to know to play World of Tanks. It has pages of tabulated data, which if you were to look at it, it's got the basic stuff, length, weight, track pitch, how many links per track, ground pressure, all that sort of information that is actually useful in the game. And they also have very helpful labeled diagrams of things as they would be configured in battle. So you go to one of the museums. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they had an M10 out in the yard here. They would not have all the stowage with the ammunition and the tarps and in the museum. They won't. They usually won't. So the manual is where you're going to get this information that the 3D modelers will need to model a lot of these features. Plus, even if you see a picture of something, especially if you're not a tanker, you may not be able to model it properly because you just don't know what the heck it's supposed to do in the first place. So, but if you see this thing that says breech operating handle, that's what it is. It's not just a stick. It's actually pivoted around this here, so it goes forwards and backwards to open the breech. So we'll start off with the manual. Of course, the problems are, A, you got to find the manual. B, you got to be able to understand the manual, which is a problem with the Japanese vehicles. So why don't you do more Chieftain's Hatch stuff on the Russians than on the German stuff? I can't read the manual. I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian. Anyway, you get the general idea. Manuals are good. Of course, manuals are usually only found for vehicles that entered service. You will find some manuals for captured vehicles. You will find occasionally manuals for vehicles that didn't enter service. For example, we found the manual for the T-95 gun motor carriage, a big thing with four tracks that the US Army managed to lose for 30 years. How do you lose a 100 ton? It's the biggest thing you ever built, and you lose it for 27 years in a field. Has anyone seen the picture? I posted it up. Has anybody seen the picture of what that tank was hiding behind? What was that tank hiding behind? Okay. Can somebody describe in their own words what this picture was of the T-95, the big monster 100-ton tank, what it looked like in the field? Okay. Imagine a bush. It's about as high as this. It's about twice as wide as this. In a completely open field. The T-95 is behind this bush. For 27 years. Well, I thought it was already a perfect example of World of Tanks spotting mechanics in operation. I'm pretty sure I have it on my Facebook page. If not, I have it on the forum. And I'll just put it up in a random musings thread, and you can see it again. It is the most insane thing ever. Anyway. Back on top. I have this terrible problem. I'm Irish. I'll go off on tangents. And then I'll go off on a tangent on the tangent. I'll come back and I'll go back down the first tangent. Anyway. All right, so there are other things in manuals. So we can get Russian manuals. Obviously, the Russians can read them. The Archer on the left, obviously, from a British manual. And again, it's got things that you really do need to know to implement in the game. Not only is it a nice 3D, three-plan view, but it's got things like the arc of traverse and the gun elevation and depression and dimensions and all. This is stuff that is basically, we have to come up with this. If we can't find the information, we got to come up with it. So finding the information, far and away, best course of action. Okay, so the next thing we got are the test results. Obviously, before any vehicle enters service, they send it to the proving grounds. In the US, it's Aberdeen. In the UK, it will be Lulworth or Bovington or it's a movie studio now, long something. And of course, in Russia, it is Kubinka. When they get their vehicle for testing, at least what the US does, and I presume the other ones do as well, the first thing they do is they take it to have photographs taken, and then they take it to get measured. And it is a standard form on the left. It's a fill-in-the-blanks form, so that's why some of it is typed in hard type, and some of it is just copy type. And on April the 14th of 1942, those were the measured specifications of the, 37mm gun motor carriage T-13, I think it is. T-14? Yes, you are correct. Sorry. Bad nick. And you can't argue with them. As I say, by the time they get to the production and development is completed, some of these configurations may have changed because they will find mistakes. They will realize that, you really need to have the idler wheel go further forward in order to get out of ditches, which is something that they missed on the M114 if you ever see one of those. But they are accurate, they were specific, and you know that there is sufficient information for you to implement. Plus, they also have verbal descriptions of the various things that they tested. So you won't be able to read it, but this is, I think, for the T-32 Heavy on the right-hand side. And I think that's where it says something like, the gun depression is supposed to be 10 degrees. The specifications call for 10 degrees, but in actuality, we could only do 5 when we tested it. In the game right now, it is 10 degrees. We're not planning on changing it. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. Usually, these test results will also explain why and how important it was to fix it. So when it said the gun depression is only 5 degrees and we're not entirely sure why, it was deemed down to be basically a design flaw, manufacturing defect, which would be solved would the T-32 actually enter into production. That's great. I waffled on for 20 minutes so far. I was afraid we'd be in the Q&A section so far. Okay. So at the top, you'll probably recognize the armor model for the T-69 medium tank. If you haven't looked at it, it looks like that. It's a patchwork. It's a bizarre quilt of squares. We didn't just come up with that off the top of our head. It used to be a much more homogeneous sort of armor scheme. The reason is the picture at the bottom. As part of the testing process, the US Army will take, and most other armies will as well, they will take a real vehicle or a real turret or a real hull, and they will really shoot at it to see just how good it was at stopping incoming rounds. And before they shot at it, they measured it in great detail. They would carve up with chalk whatever it was they were testing into over 100 pieces, about 14 inches square, 10 to 14 inches square. And they would measure each numbered square in 5 places. And that would then become this massive list of data. So 29, 0.1, which is always like the top left, 0.1, 2.3 inches, 0.2, 2.4 inches, 0.3, 2.45 inches, and so on. And with all that data, we could then implement the armor model into the game. And that's, we got the squares, we implemented the squares. That's why the the T-69 looks like that. There are a couple of other vehicles who've been able to do the same thing. The M103 is one, for example. All right, next option, go to the real thing. We've generally been okay with museums walking up. Excuse me, you don't know me from Adam, but do you mind if I climb over your tank with this thickness gauge and measure it a bit? And usually they're quite good about it. Up until recently, we had pretty much the run of museums. And so you see me there, happy as Larry, in Fort Benning on top of the T-29 with a thickness gauge. Now here's the problem. Honeycutt, working from the archives, and I've seen the document that he used to work from the archives, Honeycutt says the frontal turret armor, the mantlet on the T-29 series is 268, whatever it is, like 12 inches thick. In actuality, it's 8. And we only discovered this, there is one single document I found in passing that kind of mentioned 8 inches, but it's not an official drawing, shall we say. And then I went to the tank and I actually started measuring, it's 8 inches. Here's the problem. This is a tank that has already been balanced and implemented into the game, together with the T-34, which is a premium, and we don't like to mess with premiums because people paid real money for them. And also the T-30. We couldn't really go ahead and rebalance it on the basis of this information that we found after the fact. So there's now this bigger push for getting the information before we actually modeled the tank in the first place. But at the time when the game was starting up, we didn't have the same resources, we didn't have the time, we had to push things out, and we used the best information that we had at the time, i.e. Honeycutt. Okay, so next option is you just go to the archives yourself. And I don't know if you read my article on the archives, they're a complete mess. Not to cast aspersions on the archive staff. They do the best job they can. The problem is that the archivists of the army in the 1950s didn't bother any sort of filing system. They just threw everything into boxes and shipped them to the National Archives. So there are about, I'd say, 40,000 of those boxes, those A4 size boxes, and nobody really knows what's in them. And you can't, it's not like you go to a library and you just browse and you pick off shelves. You actually have to specifically request a specific box from a specific record group, and they will go get you the card. Because they don't want random people destroying archives. They bring it to you, and it's a shotgun effect. You are there just randomly, I'll pick this section of boxes. And you hope that it's a good section and you will find what you're looking for. Now, there's a good thing about this and the bad thing. The good thing about this, well, let's start with the bad. The bad thing is obviously if you're looking for something specific, it's terrible to find. I want to find the exact armor values of the T-28 Super Heavy Tank 8-inch version. And they did actually cast some 8-inch hulls. The ones that were built were all 12-inch. But I know that the 8-inch hull existed. I know that they did testing on the 8-inch hull, that they did shoot at it. Where in the archives do I look? Now, if I knew where to look, what I would do, I would go to the archives, I will say, give me this box that has the 8-inch testing for the hull. They would go, they would give me the box, I would look at it, I would get the information, I'll say, thank you very much, close the box, send it back, and we're done. Because I don't have a clue where anything is, and I'm just randomly looking for stuff, it's great because I'm finding stuff I didn't even know to think to look for, because they'd been lost to history. So it's great for finding new stuff, but you got to devote a whole heck of a lot of time to do it. So when I go to the archives, I'm there about a week at a time. I run 12-hour days. I don't eat lunch, which is a nuisance to the people I drag along with me. But the information is there, and if it comes from the archives and I scan it, it is pretty much unarguable, except by people that don't bother to look at the actual original archive document that I've scanned, and because they read something in Achtung Panzer and they said that was the way it was going to be. Arguing with those people is difficult. I will have a Q&A time at the end. Another thing on the right, is that a T92 or a T71? I think it's a T71. They would come up with these spec sheets. They were not as accurate as those done by the archives. Correction, by the testing grounds at Aberdeen. But, especially for things that were never actually built and tested, these are as good as we're going to get. And no, this is not the oscillating turret T71 that's in the game. There were competing models. But it's got basic dimensional info on the top. It's got all the armor values, horsepower values, and all that at the bottom. It's the 95% solution. We can do better. Fantastic. If we can't, it's good enough. And it's things like that primarily, which is what people like Honeycutters and Logo are working off of. A good source, an unimpeachable source, not necessarily the most accurate source. Okay, and then you got published literature. Things like Honeycutt, or Zaloga, or Baryatinsky, or the stuff that you go on Amazon, on eBay, you buy the book, you download it, and you start flicking through it. Usually pretty good. Some authors are better than others. Yeah, basically just make a judgment call as to how good you think that author is if one is in conflict with the other. Check the sources, check the citations, and hope for the best. That bookstore, incidentally, who's that guy from Brussels? Is he here? Ah, okay. There was a bloke I met outside. He was from Brussels. That is a bookstore in Brussels. Every single one of those books is military. It is an astounding bookstore, and you can get to it if you go to Brussels by the subway, by the metro. PM me if you ever go that way. It's, you could spend a lot of money in that bookstore. I did not have the corporate credit card. Sadly, I only left with 1 or 2 books. And it's actually interesting. If you look at an American bookstore or magazine, the World War II history magazines, versus those that you find in, let's say, the Czech Republic, it's night and day. We're amateurs. For whatever reason, we like the superficial stuff that has a good circulation. The Eastern Europeans, they do incredibly well-detailed stuff that has a circulation of about 300 people. But if you can find it, nothing's better. It's very strange, the cultural difference between the continents on this. Okay, then you can just go to Google, open source photographs. So not necessarily as good as official Aberdeen testing ground proving photographs, but they will at least help the 3D modelers figure things out. All right, now you get to what I call scraping the barrel. Things that, if we have nothing better, we will use it because nobody can prove us wrong. And that's, I build scale models as well, and that has been my philosophy a lot of times, is I built it. If I cannot find, with my resources, the information that I need to make this right, no way anybody can prove it's wrong. So, for example, the vehicle on the left is a Chieftain Mark II. So we all know Chieftain's coming in as a tier 10. We were looking to make it a Mark II. Now it looks like it's going to be a 6 or a 3. But it was very, very difficult to find good photographs on the materials we had. I mean, we got Griffin's Chieftain book. We've gone to the Tank Museum. But for whatever reason, finding good reference photos for us seems to be very difficult. It seems to be a lot of the modelers are people that have personal photographs in their own personal collection of tanks that they were on back in the 50s and back in the 60s and 70s. They make models of them. They post up what the models are. So you can see by the difference in color what the changes are between the Mark II and the Mark V that the kit was originally based off of. So we send that to the 3D modelers, and they go, aha, look, the headlights are different. A Chieftain Mark V has twin headlights. It's got the IR drive and it's got the white service drive. The Mark II had a single large headlight in a smaller cage. You got differences with the stowage boxes. You got differences, using they're actually very good mechanically. Of course, you are trusting that the modeler that you're copying off has got it right in the first place. But again, it's the best information you got. Who's going to prove you wrong? And then you got other random websites, Wikipedia, Achtung Panzer. No, we do put these at the bottom of the list, with good reason. But again, if that's the best we've got and we really want to implement this into the game, we'll take a look at the data. Sometimes they source it correctly, and we look at the footnote. If you go to Wikipedia, look at the footnote, link it back, see where it comes from. It might be reputable. Okay. Now, here's a problem example of implementing a game. Now, I'm sure there's a talk a little bit later about art department getting things in and how they actually do it. But those of you on PC, how many of you remember when the T-54E1 looked like this? Back in about 7, 8. Okay, you do over there. Very, very, okay, a couple back there. Very, very blocky. Vertical, sort of a vertical front, definitely vertical sides. Here's the problem. All we had to go on was Honeycut. The Honeycut gave us a 3D plan. The modelers did the best they could with the 3D plans. Well, the lads asked me to go and actually measure the thing because we had no reliable, I mean, we had some basic armor values, but we wanted some better armor values. So off I go. So here's some more, so this is the original again. Very square back end, using the photographs from Honeycut and the plans. So it looks pretty reasonable. Until I actually go to Aberdeen. And I find this thing sitting in, as you can see, in a field, in an overgrown field. I had to go on a gravel trail for about 3/4 of a mile into the backwoods of Aberdeen to do this. T-54E1 sitting lonely and abandoned and neglected. And I start measuring it. And up at the top right corner, all those little dark splotches, that's the ultrasonic gel that it used to... So the armor value that we have in the game is as good as you're going to get. But you can see that it's actually not as blocky as it was originally implemented. Not as blocky as the line drawings actually said. So we sent this back to the 3D modelers. Hey, 3D modelers, you got it wrong. Here are some photographs. It's much more smoother. It's much more angled. It is not as blocky. So they changed it, and they made it into the current model we know and love. And of course, I have physically seen this thing. I know what it really looks like, and I look at the new 3D model that we currently implement. It is still wrong. So I follow the tank. The tank is now sitting, as of a year ago, in Anniston Army Depot, Alabama. And I get to the point, right, I go down to Home Depot, I get masking tape. And I start gridding the turret on this. And if you, look at the top right photograph. You see how that kind of angles sideways? And compared to the 3D model, it is completely wrong, but it was the best we could do at the time with the information that we had available to us. So, I have photographed this. I have sent this off to the modelers. I've seen the reference folder that they use for the T-54E1. It is in there. So when it gets into HD model, I presume they will actually get it like the real vehicle. And there's a couple of others like that. I did it with the M7 medium, which has a curved front. I've done it with the T69, which is also compound curves. Excuse me. But that's just an example of some of the difficulty that we have. We can have all the resources in the world and still get it wrong. Not out of any incompetence or anything, just because of how difficult it is sometimes to implement a physical feature without having seen it with your own two eyes. All right, so once you have made the vehicle, you send it off to the balance team. So if you want to complain about how a vehicle is overpowered or underpowered, talk to Vader. Cannoneer works for Vader. I have not been allowed access to the arcane knowledge of the balance parameters. I am not worthy. However, as near as I can tell, there are various grades of balance parameter. One is the actual hard stat. Whatever the heck it is in the real vehicle, that's what it is in the game. That's things like armor values, that's things like top speed. Then there are parameters that, well, we'll try to follow them if we can. Things like turret traverse rate. Then there are the parameters, we don't care what the real one was, we'll make it up. Reverse speed is usually a good one for that. But here's the problem. Have any of you played Steel Beasts? Tank Simulator, Steel Beasts? It is the best tank simulator money can buy for your PC. It is so good that I use it to train my gunners. It is absolutely accurate. Yet none of you have played it, because it is not fun. That's the problem. I mean, there are a small handful of us that play the game and do enjoy it. But when you're down to using the individual buttons to open and close the doghouse doors, the sight doors on the tank when you're under artillery fire, it's getting a little bit far. And it is so accurate, I'd say I use it to train my gunners. The emergency mode, manual mode, they're all modeled. Most players don't care. They would just want to blow things up. So the balance team has this problem, and in fact the entire game design team has this problem. Where do you draw the line between historical accuracy and gameplay? Gameplay will win. No two ways about it. We want to be a commercial success. Gameplay will win. However, that doesn't mean we can completely ignore history. We do try to implement it as much as possible whilst remaining in the parameters of this is a fun game. So generally speaking, I think they've done okay. I mean, yeah, you can make the arguments. I may or may not agree with them about things like artillery mechanics and whatever. But as a general rule, gameplay using tanks that look like the real thing, that kind of have the feel of the real thing, and they do this with World of Warships as well. If you haven't played this yet, definitely not an accurate simulation of naval combat, but a battleship feels like a battleship. A destroyer feels like a destroyer. And in fairness to the ship guys, the ships and airplanes, for doing the research for those, it's very easy. The naval archives are outstanding in pretty much every country, including the US. I found microfilm on BB-21 that we could hand all these, if we could find a metal manufacturer capable of actually building the pieces, we could hand these plans to this manufacturer, no questions asked, they could build an entirely new battleship if they followed it. It's amazing the level of detail that we've kept in those plans. Airplanes, more or less the same. There is so much public source information about airplanes, it's not hard to do research on them. We have a small problem with Masters of Orion. Historical accuracy there is questionable. However, I am very much looking forward to doing the Inside the Cheats and Hatch videos on them. I have requisitioned money in the budget for a time machine. They have not approved it. Anyway. Okay, and then finally it is sent off to the publishers who implement into the game, and we all are very happy and we pay lots of money and hooray. And that's it. So that was 44 minutes of my allotted 1 hour. I've got 15 minutes to fill, so you can ask me questions, I can sing, I can tell war stories. All right, go ahead. Are we storing the data? That is being discussed. I'm not really at liberty to discuss what we are planning on doing with them, but we do agree that it is a waste to have all this information just sitting doing nothing. So we don't know if we will make it pay available, if we'll make it freely available. That hasn't been decided yet. I have, actually my first book has been written with the research that I was finding. It was kind of like, as I was digging for stuff A, I'm coming across all this stuff about American tank destroyers that hadn't been published before. I was kind of, I'm going to keep this aside and I'm going to actually put it into a book. So hopefully early next year, maybe it should come out. So we are planning on using it in addition to being in the game. The exact format we haven't decided yet. All right, you had a question as well. Yes. I don't have the time. Let's say I find one single test report. The test report on the AMX-13 that the US Army did was 300 pages. I have a flatbed scanner. Push. I'm only there for a week. I got 40,000 dot boxes to get through. And in actuality, I will usually get through maybe 300 in a week. I don't have the time to digitize everything. Stuff that I really know I'm going to use, I will flatbed scan. Stuff that is interesting to know, and maybe I'll use it in a Chieftain's Hatch article or something like that, I'll pull out the cell phone and I'll flash pages, which the archives don't like because they want every single page to have a declassified sticker visible in the photograph, which means theoretically it's click, move, declass sticker onto here, click, and it's not much faster. And then there's stuff, I record where everything is. So I can go to my archive reference and say, box number kilo 943 had this document, this document, this document. Things like the effect of mold on rubber components of the Army 2.5-ton truck in the Pacific Theater, I don't think I need to copy. And you will be amazed how many boxes of mold investigations are sitting in those archives. All they do in testing is they test how good the tank is, does it work? No, they will go down to the most innate level of detail. We are testing this manufacturer's spark plugs against this manufacturer's spark plugs. And each one requires a folder of all the documents. You got to flick through to get past to get to the interesting stuff. So 98% of what's in the archives is useless to anybody. The problem is finding those extra 2%. Sir. The restoration of the mouse, last I heard, was shelved. They made. I know they took good effort in. When I was at Bovington at the end of last year's Tank Fest, I hung around the archives, and a team of folks from Kubenka were doing research at Bovington's archives because apparently the British have the best remaining plans for the mouse. Where that went, I am not involved in that line. I believe what they've decided for now is that it's just more than they can chew. Like, how do you eat an elephant? A piece at a time? No, I can't even do that with the mouse. And they've decided that they're going to focus their resources on things that have probably got a better return on that investment of time and effort and money. Is it permanently cancelled? I have no idea. I doubt it, because I think Kubenka are looking at this thing. It's a wonderful, attraction. Hey, we can get this thing clanking around on Day of the Tank Man, and many millions of people will come to watch it. But I think they're reevaluating the exact level of restoration. I don't think they're going to try to get it back to factory condition anymore. I think they're just trying to get it, hey, I can get the thing to run. However, that is my personal educated guess. It is not anything that I have seen in writing because I am not part of that interface. Go ahead, baseball cap. Will the Japanese heavy tanks take over from the other heavy tanks? I'll tell you, they'll take over the map. They're huge. I doubt they will take over when what you can do is you can get a T-62, drive up next to the Japanese heavy tank and just sit there plinking shots into its side when the Japanese heavy tank can't depress the gun to do anything about it. People do it with the mouse and it's bad enough, but with these Japanese monstrosities, I have not played them on a test server. They do not seem to be massively heavy. They strike me as being very Tog-like, being huge with this wall of hit points coming at you, and a good gun. I don't think they're going to have mouse levels of armor, or even E5 levels of armor. So we will see how they work out. And again, going back to research, that's why the Japanese heavies have been so heavily delayed, was because, frankly, getting information on these things, it's worse than finding gold dust. And we've been always hoping that our digs, there's a Japanese version of me. His name is Tadamasa Mikiyama, and he goes by the name of the Phalanx. So he's Japanese. He goes to the Japanese archives. He digs for this stuff, and we keep hoping that he will come across the holy grail of Japanese heavy tank documents, and we can properly implement it. And in actuality, I mean, it's very, very. We haven't found very much. So these are our best guesses on the limited information we have available. That's why it was delayed so much. But again, who can prove us wrong? All right, what is the biggest trigger for changing a tank once we have the single? I'm not going to say one is more important. One will probably put a more pressing priority on it. So if there is something that is gameplay broken, ridiculously overpowered, that probably puts it a little bit higher up on the list of things we need to look at. Now, when they get around to looking at it, because let's say, what's the most OP thing in the game right now? I can't even remember what. A waffle tractor. Waffle tractor 100. That's a bad example because we have no historical data for it. We did actually, there is actually a reason we did that. And as you know, it's probably going to be replaced. All right, so let's say we're looking at something that actually existed, like a T-62A, that was pretty mean in the game and might need a rebalance. So the first thing we do when they're going to do a rebalance is they're going to have a look, say, well, is there any historical data that is more recent than the old one, which would help? So let's say we actually went and measured the thing, we realized it actually has an inch less armor than we thought it did. Or we can do this with the T-29 Heavy, for example. It's got more armor than it really does. The T-29 Heavy is considered to be one of the best for its tier. A very high win rate for obvious reasons. It needs a nerf. How do we do it? Aha, we can reduce the frontal armor to historical values that will achieve the gameplay result while also being historical. Now, other things that aren't gameplay broken, like the M10 tank destroyer with the Ford GAA engine that I've been calling for like years, that has not been implemented, but when it does get implemented, the reason everybody wants it, you get an extra 50 horsepower. But the M10 was not a broken tank. It was not something that really needed fixing, so the impetus to fix it wasn't really all that there. And the extra 50 horsepower for the engine wasn't going to do very much anyway, so they just left it be until the actual TD rebalance, and that's when it will be implemented. So unless there is something really stupidly obvious, like the FV4202, which has the wrong armor entirely, it's way over armored, and that's one of the big reasons why it's being removed. It's not because the 4202 is overpowered. I mean, I have one. I think it's okay. But it's not overpowered, but that's why it's being rid of it. Okay, Arlette is waving at me. Apparently I have to start wrapping up. I've got 7 minutes. Yeah. Anybody on that side? Sir. The one I'm most pleased about has been the one about the naming documents. I've gone on it before. It's the document from November 44 where the U.S. Army Ordnance Branch officially names General Sherman, General Jackson, Priest, Bazooka. And the reason that was one of the things kind of lost to history. A lot of people knew that these names existed. There was a lot of debate as to whether or not the Americans officially called it this or the modelers called it that. And this is one of those things that I found just page after page through the boxes, randomly looking through things. I found this document, my God, everything that I had known about for the last 30 years is wrong. So, I mean, it wasn't an earth-shattering thing, but I was very, very happy I found it. I was also very pleased to find the U.S. Army's test of the Firefly turret. They were very detailed tests, they were very in-depth, and they explained a lot about Firefly and why the U.S. Army didn't like it. Again, there's very much a lot of myth and misconception about that. As for what is on my current I would dearly love to find list, I'm kind of interested a little bit, I guess, in the if there's an American evaluation of Chieftain, for obvious reasons. The Christie tests back in the 20s. But believe it or not, the single tank that I found the most documentation for in the archives is the T1 Cunningham. I have, and I posted up the very first page on my Facebook page. It is a letter from the Department of the Army to Cunningham Coach Builders, whatever it is, saying, we're looking at building this new tank. Can we borrow your clutch? Your clutch design. And it went all the way. It's like 500-600 pages of letters, all very politely written, all about the development of the T1 Cunningham, which of course I didn't have time to scan because it's 600 pages of information I did not need for the game. But I do know where it is, so I can go back to it if I ever want to. Okay, I got, I think, 2 more questions. Shouldn't have much offensive capability to begin with. It's a tank destroyer. We've had some discussion about Hellcat. I mean, I've been going back and forth with the balance team about that one. I mean, my personal solution to nerfing it was just give it the 76mm gun. So you have a 90mm that's slow with the Jackson, and you got a 76 that's fast with the M18. For whatever reason, the folks in Minsk actively thought about it and decided to go the way they went. So now it's just going to go back to, is Hellcat performing in terms of overall win rate? If it is smack in the middle of all those vehicles for all that tier, then it's just going to stay as it is. Okay, 3. Yeah. Go ahead. I haven't played it very much. Contrary to popular belief, there is no prohibition on our playing competitor games in the office. Not during work hours, but we are gamers. We will play games. I'm only up on tier 2 simply because any time that the test has been open, I've been traveling or busy and I haven't been able to play very much. I like modern tanks. I am a modern tanker, so I'm obviously going to give it a little bit of my time. Outside of that, I have no particular opinion on the game because I haven't played it very much. Save your pocket money. Save your pocket money. The question was, are the tactical press books, the ones that were written in Russia, are they coming out in English? And we got a couple of things. I posted on my Facebook page also, we're going to try to do a World of Tanks version of one of the Honeycutt books. So we'll see that. Okay, last question, sir, baseball cap.
Will we see Carl make a comeback?
Will we see who make a comeback? Carl. Oh, the 8-bit mode. I like this, the football mode, personally. I'm waiting for rugby mode. That should be nice and violent. I have no idea. I would be very surprised if it doesn't make a comeback. It was a lot of fun.